Number 6, subsistence. Work, division of labor, how people survive. There was a company of construction workers, and I believe they were Amish, and a young man was working for them, and when business slacked off a little bit, he was the first one laid off. And he said, why are you laying me off? I've been here longer and I do a good job, and there were other people that hadn't been there as long, and he didn't think their work was as valuable as his, and why are you laying me off? They said, because you're single, you don't have kids. Okay, in their mind, you lay off the single guys first because they don't need the jobs bad. Okay, now, to some people that makes perfect sense, to other people that's ridiculous. Okay, because, you know, there's one perspective that would say a person has his job totally based on his qualifications. Okay, if he's doing a great job and he's been there the longest, although that again, that's a cultural thing. Why does it matter who's been there the longest? Okay, to some people it obviously should, to other people it obviously shouldn't. And by the way, the expression common sense doesn't make any sense. There's no such thing as common sense, as in the way everybody can just see that it obviously is. There isn't anything like that. What is common sense to you is not common sense to everybody else. So here's this company, and to them it's obvious that if here's a guy with 3 little kids and a wife at home, we can't lay him off because he won't be able to pay his bills and take care of his family. But here's this guy, all he's got is trying to pay for his new truck and spending his own money for whatever he wants so he can survive. Wouldn't lay him off. Okay, to them that was the obvious decision. Bisexuality. Now, this is not talking about people who are confused about their gender or perverted. It's not talking about that. It's just talking about the existence of 2 genders. Gender actually could be a good term there for number 7, but that's not what Edward Hall had. But the fact that there are 2 genders and the form that takes in a society, okay, differences in speech, dress, and conduct. And again, there are so many things that seem obvious to us on this that are not obvious to everyone. What is women's work? Okay, some men do not want to do something that they identify as women's work. There's men's work that some women would not want to do. But those categories, you know, chopping wood and carrying the water, for example, is definitely women's work in some cultures. Okay? What does it mean to be a lady? Okay? In other words, a woman who is dressed properly and comports herself properly to show that she is a person of good morals and good behavior and so on. What does it mean? What would that look like? Okay? That's very different from one culture to another. Let me give you a very extreme example. In an African village, a missionary was concerned because the women did not wear blouses. Okay? In fact, they wore nothing from the waist up. That was their culture in this African village. And so the missionary talks to the elders. He says, you know, guys, this is not good. You know, let's upgrade a little here and get some modesty, and let's, you know, have your wives wear blouses. And they were shocked because in their culture, the only women who wore anything were women on the upper body were women who were trying to attract attention and have illicit relationships. In fact, prostitutes were the ones who would dress themselves up like that to go out. They said, we don't want our wives to look like prostitutes. In fact, one chief in one village, trying to raise the morals of his village, he outlawed blouses in his village. He said, we're not going to have women coming into our village wearing blouses. We're a high moral people around here. Okay? Now, that probably boggles your mind, right? It would mine. But to them, and by the way, though, in a lot of cultures, things like perfume and pantyhose, and of course makeup, and several other things, they fell in that category at first when they first came out. The women who wore pantyhose were the ones who were a little bit on the shady side. They were trying to get attention. Okay, so that's where some of that comes from, and culture goes along, and our concept of those things change. Differences between men and women, and what does it mean to be a lady? What does it mean to be manly? How should a man treat a woman? How should a woman treat a man? G.K. Chesterton made a trip to Palestine, Israel, long ago. He said there are a lot of places where you can see, we see the picture of what Catholics call the Holy Family, Joseph and Mary and the child, and maybe a donkey in the picture if they're traveling. And so the picture is Joseph leading the donkey and Mary sitting on the donkey, either holding a baby or soon to have the baby. But so let's say holding the baby, and that's the picture that we often see. And he said, you see that often in Palestine still, but there's a difference. The man is riding the donkey. And the woman walks behind, carrying or leading the child. Okay? Now, we think, but that's their culture, and it would have been the culture when unless Joseph was a very considerate and kind man, he rode the donkey to Bethlehem, not Mary. And Mary walked along behind. Okay, now, again, if he was a very kind and considerate man, he was thinking, okay, she's about to have a baby, she's due, maybe she better ride the donkey. But that would have been very rare for a man to do that, to let a woman ride the donkey. Because maintaining respect and the status of the man was a very big priority. And so he didn't walk and the woman ride, because the woman was way down in status from him. And same with helping her with any of the work or anything like that. The man was respected, and the woman was supposed to always remember that. So those things are cultural. And you could say, well, that isn't the way it ought to be. Well, maybe you're right, and maybe we have good reasons for that. But what we assume to be normal is not always assumed to be normal. Who should walk in front when a man and a woman are walking somewhere? If you come to a doorway, who goes through first? Our culture is the man opens the door for the lady if there's a door, or at least stops and lets her go through. Other cultures, that's not the way. And the wife follows the husband when they are walking somewhere. She walks behind him. He leads the way because he's the leader. And so, a lot of differences. Okay, ways of learning. Observation, modeling, instruction. Where are children taught? Are they sent down the road to school? Are they taught at home? How is it done? How is an occupation learned? You want to become a drill press operator or a leather worker or a computer programmer. How is that learned? Different cultures would approach that in different ways. Maybe mentoring or classes, whatever. Play, humor, and games. One of the first things you find out as if you do a lot of speaking and you go into another culture is they don't always think your jokes are funny. And sometimes that's a bad translator. You know you've got a bad translator if they're laughing at the wrong times. You're trying to tell a story and you said something you thought was serious and they think it was a joke, and then you say a joke and they just kind of look at you like they don't know what you meant. And part of that's bad translation. Sometimes it's cultural. What you thought was funny and described doesn't strike them as funny at all. The way games are played. The role of competition. Some cultures like to compete. Anytime they're playing anything, they keep score. They never play without keeping score in some cultures. Other cultures, it's not important. I remember playing volleyball with about 20 young people in Ukraine. And we were out this college picnic. They set up the net. And so we're playing, hitting the ball back and forth. And so I suggested about 3 different times that we have teams and start counting the points. And nobody was interested in that. They were satisfied just keep knocking the ball back and forth. To me, that was pointless. Put a pun on it. But that was, to me, to enjoy a game, I need to feel some sense of progress. Even if I'm behind, at least I know how I'm doing, I like to count the score. I like to have track of that. To them, competition didn't matter so much. And so humor that would make fun of somebody, what would be permissible and what would not would be a lot different from one culture to another. And what kind of things you could laugh about. There would be some things you could laugh at with somebody and they'll laugh with you. There'd be other things they would be enraged and ready to fight. Okay? And what those things are varies from one culture to another. Defense. Now this is all kinds of defense. Physical safety, health procedures, social conflicts, even defending your opinion, your beliefs, all those things. Very broad category there. How should a criminal be punished? That gets a cultural answer. For the first several thousand years of human history, jails were not used very much. Most societies didn't have such a thing as a jail, where we take that for granted as the natural punishment for a lawbreaker is that he be locked up. Other cultures, they never locked anybody up. They dealt with it in other ways. So the way you deal with a crime, it doesn't mean they were light on crime. In fact, they might have been more likely to use capital punishment, put somebody to death, partly because of the fact that there was no place to lock him up. Okay? So if you really don't want him out in society because you're afraid he'll kill more people or whatever, and why lock him up and have somebody responsible to feed him and take care of him for the next, for the rest of his life? If he really can't go on with life, then end it. That's the philosophy. It would be the philosophy in some cultures. How do we define and avoid contamination? Contamination of any kind. But let's take it, say, from biological. How do you avoid germs? How do you avoid getting sick? And there are different cultures, and some that would have superstitions about how to do that.